Good afternoon, Year 10. So, we're going to carry on with our work on hormones and homeostasis now by working through some work on urea production. Now, as a starter, there are 3 questions there, and then the 2 bullet points at the bottom. I just want you to have a think about what do you already know about this. So, what is urea? Where is it found in your body? That's not something we've been taught yet, but I'd like you to have a think just for 30 seconds. What do I think before I then tell you the answer to see how much do we already know. So do the 3 questions, back of your books as normal, please. Pause me now. Fine. So, what is thermoregulation? It's the homeostasis of temperature, or it is the way in which your body controls its temperature. What is vasoconstriction? Vasoconstriction is where the blood vessels near the surface of your skin are closed, they're squeezed tight, closed, so that blood can't get to the surface of your skin, so that you don't lose heat. And that happens when it's cold. What does vasodilation do for your body? It's the opposite. It's where your blood vessels expand near the surface of your skin, so that more blood gets to the surface of your skin. You go red in the cheeks and in other places of your body, and so lots of heat is lost to the environment. That's when it's hot, and it cools you down. So they're opposites. What's urea? That was the question. Now we're going to talk about that now. You've definitely heard of urine, and it's very related, and it's quite important that you understand the differences between those 2 things. So firstly, urea, and incidentally the title is urea production. You write that down, urea production. Urea is a chemical that is created when amino acids are broken down in your liver. Why do we break them down? We break them down to release some energy from them. So if you've got some leftover amino acids, which you've got by digesting the proteins of the plant or animal you've eaten, they will then be used to release energy, and that is done in the liver, and it creates this byproduct of urea. Now, like a lot of products of chemical reactions in your body, this one is completely toxic. And if you have too much of it, causes all kinds of nasty symptoms, like the ones you can see on your screen. Usually, it's not going to go as far as slipping into a coma, but if you're not making enough urea, if you're not removing your urea fast enough, it can actually cause you to die. And where people are not able to remove their urea, that causes all kinds of issues for them. They have to be in hospital. So, can you please make sure that you've got down those 2 bullet points of notes? So if you need to pause me, do. Right. Now, there are 3 stages here, okay? And do I want you to write them down? Yes, I do. I'd like you to write these down. So, there are 3 stages in any case. The first thing is your liver creates the urea. Now, the liver can't remove the urea. The liver doesn't have an outside access to the world, and it can't turn the urea into anything harmless. So it moves it into the blood, and the blood is then going to take it to, step 2, the kidneys. Now, your kidneys are responsible for making your urine. And I know that we all know about the bladders. A lot of people don't necessarily know that the kidneys, that's what the kidneys are for. They make your urine, and they send it to the bladder. And that's step 3, the urine is moved to the bladder, where it's stored and then released. So there's 3 stages there. Now I'm going to turn this into a kind of a flow chart, because it's ridiculously important we know these 3 stages. If you haven't got these notes down, just pause me very quickly. And then, this. I'd like you to really simply copy this. I mean, the liver is a triangle, the kidney is kidney-shaped, and the bladder is a circle with some tubes attached. Don't make it any more fancy. Just giving you the labels for the organs. Label the organs, and then write down what each organ does in urea production and release. Okay, so they're in the correct order. Write down what each organ is and what it does. So by the end of this task, and I'm sure you'll have to pause me at some point, you will have a list of 3 things that has to happen to remove urea from your body, and you will have this nice little diagram drawn in. Just 2 ways of writing the same thing, and hopefully that will get it completely stuck in your head. And we're going to talk about it a lot anyway as we go through this lesson, so don't worry if you haven't immediately memorized it. So we're going to go into a bit more detail. I'm going to start with the more detail on step 1. Now, removing urea is a type of homeostasis. Homeostasis is maintaining the correct internal conditions in your body. And we've done that question 100 times. But the amount of urea you should have in your body is nigh on none, as little as possible. So the homeostasis of urea means removing all the urea, maintaining the correct amount of urea, none. Now, a little bit of detail here. By the way, you never need to know this diagram on the right. Please don't bother copying that down or worrying about all the COOHs and so on. But the process is called deamination. Deamination. What's going to happen is that the liver is going to take all of the nitrogen off of this amino acid, and in actual fact you don't even really need to know that, but you need to know it will release an enormous amount of energy, much more energy than a lot of other chemicals which you might do, for instance, via respiration. So this is a really good way of releasing energy, and this is why we're going to put up with the production of urea. It's called, and the key word here is deamination. You have to know what that term means. So, again, you can write down these notes. There are a few notes this lesson I do have to say, but get down those notes. Pause me if you have to. You probably will have to. And we'll move on. Fine. So, here's some questions. Now, I don't anticipate you having to write these questions down because you should already have the notes. There's 5 questions there. I'm going to ask you just in your head, can I answer all 5 of those questions? And if you really can't remember all the answers at once, just scribble down a word for each one. Okay? So take 30 seconds a minute, nothing fancy. Right. The name of the process where urea is made, deamination. The reactants are urea. Yep. I apologise. Amino acids, just amino acids. What's removed from the amino acids is some nitrogen, and what's made is urea. And why is that done? To release an enormous amount of energy. If you've got that, first stage, check. Now I'm going to move on to the second stage. Okay, so we said the second stage was where the kidney is going to take the urea out, and this is by far the most complicated stage. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. So, we've done very similar questions. Right, kidney function. Now, kidneys, what they do is they produce your urine. We've talked about that. Again, you don't need to memorise this diagram on the right, it's just a nice little picture. The urine has to include the urea, we know that. Another thing urine contains is waste mineral ions. So let's say I eat some food that's ridiculously high in potassium. I eat 6 bananas, one after another. That waste potassium is not stored in my body. If it was stored in my body, it could actually cause quite a lot of harm. And there's a urban legend goes around that if you eat 30 or 40 bananas, you'll have a heart attack and die. And that's only if your body doesn't remove the potassium. So what the kidney has to do is remove that potassium, sodium, calcium, magnesium, all of these excess. We do need some. We don't want too much. So they're going to remove the excesses. And as you know, it's going to contain some water. It's not a paste that dribbles out of you. It has some water in there as well. And again, this is another form of homeostasis. We're keeping the right amount of mineral ions, we're keeping the right amount of water, and we're keeping the right amount of urea. So this is all homeostasis, all carried out by the kidney, all clumped together. Now, there's 2 stages to keeping things out that you don't want in the urine. So we need a lot of things not to go into the urine. We need blood cells not to go into the urine. If all of your blood cells went into your urine, you peed out all your blood, you die. Proteins, we don't want our proteins to go into the urine because you've just eaten the proteins. You don't want them to immediately be lost again. And other large objects, things like large carbohydrates, fats, that kind of thing, they don't go into the urine at all. And there's a load of other things which we need to keep in the urine. Things like glucose. Things like the amount of mineral ions we do need, the potassium we do need. Things like the water we do need. That has to be kept in the blood. Now, there's 2 stages. In the kidney, there are 2 ways of stopping things going into the urine. there is a filter right at the beginning of the kidney. Now, I'm not going to go into any more detail about where the filter is, how the filter works, but broadly, all the filter does is it keeps out large objects out of your urine. So all of your blood goes into your kidney, and this filter stops the blood cells getting through, stops the proteins getting through, and stops any other large object going through. So that third paragraph there, proteins, blood cells, and other large objects are kept out by a filter. That just means that they just stay in the blood. They can't physically get into the bit where we're going to make the urine. But a lot of things can get in. So once you get through the filter, a lot of things are going to get through the filter. All of the water in your blood goes through the filter and into the urine production bit of the kidney. All of the glucose in your blood goes into the urine production bit of the kidney. All of the mineral ions in your blood go into the urine production bit of your kidney. So we need to take all those back again, because otherwise they'll all end up in your urine and you'll pee it all out, and that will cause you all kinds of nastiness. So what we do is we use active transport, and we learned about active transport in year 9. Active transport is using energy from respiration to pump things against a concentration gradient. So we're going to pump all of the glucose out of the urine production bit of the kidney and into the blood. We're going to pump most of the water into the blood. We're going to pump most of the mineral ions into the blood. And what should be left behind after that pumping process is all the stuff we wanted in the urine. Your water, a bit. Your mineral ions, some. All of your urea. And that's it. Now I'm going to give you a table to copy and complete. This does need copying into your book. It's quite complicated. So I'm going to flip onto this table now. Right, there you are. Let me get my head out of the way of that one. So here's your table, really straightforward, maybe not. Hopefully not too difficult. I want you to copy this out. That will actually take some time. There's quite a lot of words here. For each substance, protein, urea, glucose, etc., I want you to put a tick in the column which properly represents what's going to happen to it. So if you think it won't get through the filter into the urine production bit of the kidney, you put a tick underneath this. If you think it's reabsorbed into the blood by active transport, you put a tick under this. And if you think it's released in the urine, you put a tick under this. So pause me. Oh, by the way, some of them can be both. They might be both reabsorbed and some of it's released into the urine. So have a think about it. But pause me, fill this in. This will take you a good 4 or 5 minutes, and then I'll give you your answers. Right. So, hopefully you've got a table in front of you with ticks in the right columns. So, let's talk about proteins first. We said proteins are big, they're very big. Okay, they can be enormous actually. They can't get through the filter. So you should have a tick underneath can't get through filter. They just stay in the blood, they can't physically get into the kidneys. Urea. We said all of the urea has to be released in the urine. So that should be where your tick is. Urea is released in the urine. None of it is reabsorbed. We don't want any urea in our bodies. It's quite important. It's very important. Glucose. Glucose is actually reabsorbed. It does go through the filter because it's a tiny little molecule, but it's then immediately reabsorbed by active transport back into the blood again so that we don't lose it. Ions and water are an interesting case. We want some of the water and some of the ions to be released in the urine. So there should be a tick in released in the urine. The rest of the ions and water have to be reabsorbed. And therefore there should be a tick in reabsorbed too. So ions and water are both reabsorbed, that's most of it, but yet some of it is also released in the urine. And then blood cells are far too big to go through the filter. So your answers should look like that. Okay, that's what we should have. Fine. If you've got that, that's the most difficult part of this first half of the urine production bit. So that's nice, and I hope if you've understood it, it's nice and simple. If you've not understood it, go back through the last notes slide because I explained it. If you still don't understand it, you need to send a message to your teacher on Teams and they will explain it properly for you. Fine. So, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of question slides and then we're going to move on next lesson with a bit about some hormones, a hormone called ADH. So find the fib is the question, not 1 or 2, which one is untrue? So hopefully you got the answer was number 1. Blood cells are reabsorbed out of the urine and back into the blood. That is not true. Blood cells can't get into the kidney in the first place, they're stopped by the filter. But the kidney is part of the excretory system, it helps us to excrete our urea, and some ions are released in the urine and some are reabsorbed. Last questions for today. Oh, no, not that one. Right, just a quick exam question. So, urine consists of water, and I'm not going to read it. That's a waste of your time. Let's read it to you. Can you please go through this question? It's 3 marks here, and another 4 marks directly after this, but do the 3 marks first. So just pause me and complete the 3 marks. Now we're going to go through these answers first, to make sure you've got it, and then we're going to do the second half of the question. So, use information from the table and your own knowledge to answer the questions. Which substance A, B, C, or D, or E is a protein? Well, it says the diameter of the pores in the filter are 6 nanometers, and we should know proteins are far too big to go through the filter. So it has to be substance A is the protein, because it's too big to go through a 6 nanometer hole. Protein is not found in the urine of a healthy person. Explain why. That's because it's too large to go through the filter, so it stays in the blood and doesn't enter the urine. And I'll show you the exact mark scheme in a minute. The second half of the question, 4 marks there. Pause me again, have a go. Right, so substance B is not found in the urine of a healthy person. It's just an explanation for this. Well, because it's going to be reabsorbed by active transport into the blood. So it could be something like glucose, it could be a leftover mineral ion. It's going to be reabsorbed back into the blood by active transport. C, about hemolytic anemia. Small amounts of hemoglobin may be found in the urine of a person suffering from hemolytic anemia. The diameter of a hemoglobin molecule is 5.5 nanometers. It's not found in the urine of a healthy person. It's not found in the urine of a healthy person because hemoglobin is usually found inside red blood cells, which are much bigger. And if they're much bigger, they won't fit through the filter. But when the hemolytic anemia bursts your blood cells open, then the hemoglobin is released into the blood and it is on its own able to get through the filter and into the urine. Right, let me show you the final mark scheme here. So if you're not sure whether you got the mark or not, just have a glance down here. It's pretty much what I said, but you might find that some of the wording is different to mine. Fine. So, hopefully, you've understood everything that's been said there. I do have to say this is one of the more difficult areas of biology. And it's one of the reasons why I've kept this as quite a short video. Is that if you're not sure, you can rewatch it. And if you're really not sure, then you should contact your teacher. Because if you don't understand this, you won't understand the next lesson because it requires an understanding of this. So please don't rest on your laurels. If you don't get it, contact somebody. Your teacher will be on Teams to help you. And then next lesson, we'll move on to ADH and how the kidney can be controlled in terms of how much water it releases. Have a great day, gents, and I will look forward to seeing you at some point in the future.